My name's Chet. I'm a developer for Epi, and we're just going to go over how we use kind of UX and UI in our Shiny dashboards to make sure that they're usable and really get our message across. So UX is is a key for data visualization in your app. Often data viz dashboards get really complicated. You get a lot of different filters and checkboxes and options that you can that the users have to play around with to kind of manipulate the data. So making sure it's easy to use and easy to kind of get around is the best part in making sure that the app is usable. Pretty much, if your app isn't usable, then your data isn't either, and it's kind of a waste of an app when you do it like that. When you look at UX and data viz, you're looking at a few goals here. This is what we look at. We want to make sure our apps are intuitive, so natural to use, easy to just pick up and run with it. Immersive, you want to have a really nice experience, lots of information at your fingertips, but without being overcrowded or in the way of kind of using the application. Interactivity is obviously a big part of our dashboards. You want to be able to play around with it, get your fingers in there and really, toggle some filters and some settings to really give you control of the data that's in front of you. And another big thing is to be inclusive. So just like Shana was saying about accessibility, you want to make sure that you include people and not particularly just your standard user. A lot of people aren't going to be the best at using apps or using the web in general, so you want to be catering to that audience as well. So the first thing we'll kind of look at is the structure. In our dashboards, obviously there's a lot of data and a lot of content available to you, and often that means that there's a lot of choice for users. And what that creates is what we call a branching user flow. And what that means is that, as you can see in the kind of second image there, they enter one section, and then the next step, they play around with something, and where do they go from there? It's a bit of a free-for-all, and they can get lost and they can get confused. Compare that to kind of signing up for a newsletter. It's a very step-by-step linear flow of events, and that's really easy for the user to understand and to use the app. So we want to make it as similar to that as we can. What we do is we introduce a hierarchy to the data, like Uli was showing with having topics and subtopics and indicators, so that they can kind of follow their way through. A couple of useful components that we use are breadcrumbs and overview, which we'll take a quick look at in a couple of our apps. In Coupe here, I'll show you how we use a breadcrumb. And what a breadcrumb is this little thing at the top of the page. So pretty much it gives you a little trace of where the user's been and how they can kind of find their way again. It's a great way to kind of see the progression of how you're using the app, and also a great way to go back and know how far deep into the application you are. Another example of where we use this is in another app that we made. This one's the Annual Data Explorer, which we made for the health survey team at the Ministry of Health. And pretty much this one uses a different kind of concept, but it is a big part in easing the navigation for the user. Pretty much what we do here is we have a button here called the indicator overview. And what it does here is it groups topics and indicators in a pretty into kind of cards here, so that they can users can easily find what they're looking for and relevant topics kind of close to each other. So if I'm looking about tobacco use, for instance, all the relevant information about that is right here. So I can just click into that and it'll take me to more information, and I can dive deeper if that's what I want to do. Next thing you want to think about is the presence of state. So what this means is just communicating to the user what the application is doing. The reality of things is that apps are still pretty slow and users are very impatient. So whenever a program or a site is loading, people are just going to get impatient, and they're going to, if it's taking too long, they're just going to leave. So the best way to handle this is to use these components like spinners, which is this kind of thing here that most people are pretty familiar with, and skeletons, which are little placeholders to kind of show things that are to come later on. What these do is that they give the illusion of speed. So it occupies the user's attention without really doing anything to make it faster, but it provides a much better user experience and lets them know about what the application is doing. So a couple of great examples of this is YouTube and Facebook. They have to pull in a lot of information from all kinds of different servers and different locations. So what they do is they use spinners and they use skeletons to let you know that something's on the way, and don't get angry that it's frozen or anything like that. Control is the next best thing here that we take into account with our dashboards. Pretty much what we mean by this is we want to let users control their experience. Let them be the ones controlling the information that's at their fingertips, and let them play around and get the output that they want. So what we do is we provide options and tools for them to sort, filter, search through their data, and really manipulate it the way that they want to. Some ways that you can do it that you'll see in dashboards include things like switches. So these ones here, range sliders, which you can play around with around there. Checkboxes to toggle particular fields, and buttons, just to, everyone knows what a button does, and then also just a few drop-down menus like these. There's a big range of different control items that you can use, but not all of them are quite safe to use a lot of the time. There are a few ones that you really got to look out for, and things like text inputs and file inputs are really tricky because you can't really control what the user's going to put in. If you put a text input and it's just a maybe search for a particular topic of information, a user could put anything in there, and then you got to control, you know, how the app is going to reply to that if they're looking for apples in maybe a survey about smoking, you know. So those kind of inputs are a little bit troublesome, and a lot of the time if they're not handled properly, you get errors, and errors lead to angry users. So what we do at Epi is we make sure we just limit those. We strip out those inputs that can cause problems to make sure that the errors don't happen, and we keep very happy users that way. An example of this is kind of here. So just in the annual explorer for the Ministry of Health, we could have made any of these just standard text inputs rather than drop downs. So they could maybe search for a topic or search for an indicator like they do here. But then would have to put in a lot more kind of coding in there to handle if someone is maybe looking for an indicator about apples, again, in the smoking indicator. Obviously, there's nothing about apples in here, so we'd have to spend more time making sure that we handle that properly. And if we don't handle it properly, you get some errors. So we cut down on that by making sure that we still provide a great user experience by showing everything that they can use right there in one go. And that's a smarter way of using your inputs to limit user control, but still let them feel like they're in control. Last point that we're going to touch on is support. So not everyone is a professional at using your apps, and not everyone is going to be fully 100% great at it. So you want to be able to include those people in using your apps. A great way to do this is to just provide help, whether it's for with info buttons or help pages, video tutorials, or even on-screen walkthrough. All of these really add to the user experience and making sure that they feel like they are included and have a good way of using the app, and so that they can recover from mistakes that they might make, or if they get lost, really makes them feel kind of really welcomed in the app. An example of this, again, in our apps here, and all the ones that we make, we always have a help tab in the corner. What that does is it pops open a light box which just shows some quick guidelines to some FAQs about questions they might have. How do I navigate? And we tell them all the things that they can do to make things easier for them. So if they do get lost, they can recover from all that. It goes pretty in depth, where more than just navigating. You can get all the way into knowing you can hover things, because some people might not know that you can hover it, to all the way down to downloading our data. So there's a lot of information in there, and what that does is it just provides more options to the user. And when it comes to data viz and dashboards, options and control is really two of the biggest things that you can really take into account. Another option that you have is on-screen navigation. And here's a new thing that we're looking into kind of bringing in. It's a little thing similar to this, where pretty much you can use on-screen navigation to highlight particular areas of your app and provide context to it that way. So for example here, you can just skip through different parts and get more information about it. And it just dismisses just like that. So these are all very simple, but very effective ways of improving the user experience. So just to wrap up, pretty much, if there's a few things you want to take away from that, it's just these 4 points here. Make sure it's easy to navigate and get around, so it's easy not to get lost. Let users know what's going on. So make sure you give lots of feedback and help if needed. Let them be in control of the data. Let them play around with it. Let them feel like they're in control, but don't let them have all the control. And make sure there's a way to ask for help. If you get lost users, then you get angry users. So that's not a good thing.